That's great. So welcome to the webinar if you're joining us on a recording, but the recording is now in progress. And finally, we do have closed captions available today. So if you want a live transcript, you can click on the CC button at the bottom bar and show captions to receive those. Okay, I think that's pretty much all the housekeeping. And so welcome to this webinar as part of Trustees Week. We are NCVO. We're proud to be a partner of Trustees Week, supporting and championing trustees. And we always try to use Trustees Week to offer support to those people who give up their time voluntarily to lead charities. We do that because we exist to support the voluntary sector, because we believe they're essential for a better society. And we think that trustees are absolutely fundamental to the effectiveness of charities. We have around 17,000 members, and our strategic goals are to support, amplify, connect, and evolve the sector. And you can find out much more about our work and our strategy at our website, ncvo.org.uk. So that's just a little bit about us. Okay, I think we're ready to take the next slide, which is over to Jenny, I'm really pleased to say, and I will come back in at the end with any questions, but please feel free to continue to post those into the chat, into the Q&A function as we go, and I'll be monitoring them and picking them up. So Jenny, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. So today we're thinking about setting direction in changing times. So firstly, we'll look at what we mean by strategy, and then think about the role of trustees in setting strategy for their charities. We'll think about how organisations can go about setting direction and consider some of the tools and approaches which can help you with that. And then to finish off the session, we'll signpost you to where you can find some more resources, inspiration and information to help you. So all charities are set up on the basis that they will realise some kind of benefit to the public. And periodically reviewing and setting direction is an important step in their planning. It's the foundation of strategy. But what do we mean by that? At NCVO, we define it as the process by which we make decisions about our organisational purpose and direction and how we'll channel our resources to deliver it. So strategy is about big picture, long-term decision-making about our future direction, getting clear on our purpose, what that public benefit means in the world we are in now, the difference we're going to make, and also the how of where we will put our resources to achieve that. But there's another definition of strategy here, a constant reconciling of possibilities, means, and ends. So yes, strategy is about that high-level direction and how it's lived out, the decisions that are made on a monthly, weekly, or even day-to-day basis. Strategy isn't just something you create and document every few years. It's about ongoing review and response to your environment. In a world where the pace of change feels increasingly fast and unpredictable, it is easy to lose focus as we can be pulled by the increasing demands externally and increasing pressures on our financial resources and other resources. So being clear about your direction is important. That clarity becomes your North Star and creates a lens for all your decision-making, which should be an ongoing process, considering whether the strategy you have set a few years ago remains fit for purpose in the future. So having a clear and shared, so what do we mean by setting direction? Well, we mean having a clear and shared understanding of your charity's purpose and identity, giving your organisation that long-term big picture view, normally expressed through having some high-level goals or aims or objectives. Some people call those high-level expressions of direction by different names. These provide an agreed foundation from which a more detailed strategy can be developed, and then through to the action plans for its delivery. And setting direction for charity is a core part of the leadership role of the board. At NCVO, we say that governance is concerned with leadership and direction. It's about ensuring your charity has a clear, shared vision of purpose, which is what it is aiming to achieve and how, in broad terms, it will go about it. And as I said, this isn't just about when your organisation is having a thorough review, say every 3 or 5 or maybe longer, but also ensuring that your direction and strategy remain fit for purpose. So it's important to consider how you can embed a range of strategic planning tools and approaches into your organisational conversations to keep your existing strategy live and under review. And for that reason, it's often recommended that boards try to spend about 1/3 of their time on strategic discussions. I hope some of the things we cover today will support you with that. Here is our version of the strategic planning cycle. At the top, it starts with getting your direction right, and then moves on to environmental analysis. By that, we mean understanding the conditions you are operating in, both your external landscape, but also your internal one as well. This kind of review normally creates a number of options and choices. All organisations have limited resources. You can't do everything. And especially if your funding or your expenditure means that your income is under threat, you might even be faced with having to make choices about doing less in future. A strong sense of direction helps the organisation prioritise and make the best decisions about where it will put those resources. In reality, this isn't a straightforward cycle, but it's a series of overlapping cycles on different timescales. When you review your environment, you may need to adjust your direction a little. And when you review your options and choices, you may realise that you need more analysis in order to make good decisions. And then you can go on to your implementation, planning and review. Of course, when times are difficult, this cycle may get sped up or even broken up a little. So, thinking in more detail about your role in strategic planning and setting direction, these are headings which are taken from the Charity Commission's publication, The Essential Trustee. It's one of the foundational documents which all trustees need to be familiar with. In it, it says that as a trustee, you have to ensure that your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit and make sure your future direction is set in accordance with those charities' purposes as described in the governing document. The Charity Commission says that as trustees, you have a role in planning what your charity will do and what you want it to achieve. Moreover, that you ensure all of the charity's activities are intended to further or support its purposes and that they are actually benefiting the public. You are responsible for managing your charity's resources responsibly, which includes ensuring that your charity's assets are only used to support or carry out its purpose. So reflecting on that purpose and being clear about your strategy will support you with that decision, those decisions and thinking. So the Charity Commission talks about a trustee's role in planning, but what does that look like in reality? So a quick poll, if you would launch that for me, please, Sophie. And the question we're asking is, what is the approximate annual income of your charity? And we've given you there 5 categories. So is your organisation turning over under 10K, a micro charity under 100,000K, but higher than 10K, 100 to 1 million, 1 million to 10, or over 10 million? So the results are coming in thick and fast. We'll just give it another minute, another few moments to come in. And could you share the poll, the results of the poll now, Sophie?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Okay, that's great. So we can see that most people in the room are actually within the part of the sector who are turning over 100K to 1 million. We got a small number of trustees from organisations which are micro charities, very small ones. and nearly a third are also small, but slightly bigger than that, the under 100,000 K, and a smaller number of people from the over 1 million turnover. So how does that compare with the landscape generally? So we can see here that charities which turn over under £100,000 a year make up about 80% of registrations with the Commission, and about 50% of those are the really small ones, turning over 10K or less. Around 16% of charities are medium-sized organisations, so turning over that 100,000 to 1 million. And then only 4% actually turn over more than £1 million annually. And in fact, those really big charities, the ones which are often the household names, are only 0.5% of the sector, the ones turning over £10 million. So according to the Charity Commission, all trustees have the same responsibilities, those oversights we just took a quick look at. However, as an organisation turning over, say, £10,000 or £60,000, you are going to have a very different structure from those bigger sector players. So in reality, the trustee role in planning what your charity will do can look quite different. For larger charities, you will have a CEO and executive, and they will often do a lot of the groundwork on strategy development, maybe under instruction from the board. They will present it to the board for discussion and testing until the board feels comfortable in signing it off. The executive will then work out how it will be implemented, keeping the board informed and regularly discussing and reviewing progress with them. For larger charities then, the board's role is mainly one of oversight. But even where there is a strong executive in place, when it comes to the high-level direction setting, the board and executive need to create space to be thinking and working closely together on that. For small charities, there may be only one member of staff or a few staff, or for very small charities, no members of staff at all. In this case, the weight of the planning and decision-making often falls very much on the board or maybe other volunteers, and quite likely a lot of the implementation too. So that oversight role, it's still there in a small charity, but you may be much more hands-on too. Whatever the size of your organisation, it's important when you're thinking about strategy and setting direction to listen to a range of voices. And obviously your resources and the practicalities of doing this will vary according to your organisation size. But it's really important to listen to as many voices as is practical to understand how that world is changing rather than making assumptions about it. It is easy at the top of an organisation to either miss important information from the front line about what is going on, either inside or outside the organisation, or sometimes to alienate the people you ultimately rely on to cope with and implement your strategy in a changing world. It has been said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, so the board needs to reflect on its relationship with the rest of the organisation, the kind of dynamics in the organisation and culture within it, and where information is coming from and how valued people feel within it in sharing that information. So we've talked quite a lot about setting direction, but let's think about what we mean about that at the highest level. So at the high level, your direction is set within your charitable objects. These are registered with the Charity Commission and are in your constitution. It's really important to know these. These are the reason you exist in law. They provide an anchor for the purpose and direction of your charity when it is presented with differing needs and opinions which risk pulling it in different directions. Having said that, the world does move on, and where there is a genuine need, the Charity Commission will let you change your charitable objects and let you move on with the times. Your objects are expressed in legal language, which is usually not very inspiring. It's normal, therefore, but not obligatory, to have some other statements, usually vision and mission statements, but sometimes they're combined into one statement, or you might consider just having a statement of organisational purpose. I tend to think of these as being the user-friendly version, expressing what your purpose in law means for your organisation now, but in a way which is accessible for people inside and outside your organisation and which people can get behind. Your vision expresses the better world you are working towards, whereas your mission is much more about what you will do and your role within it. I say world, but it doesn't have to be the world. If you're working with a local community in a particular area or with a particular group, then your vision and mission statements should reflect that. We're not going to focus on vision and mission statements today, but I would really encourage you to take an honest look at yours and ask, are they aligned with our charitable objects? Do they communicate clearly? If they are not clear or incorporate a lot of ideas, your charity may not have put sufficient time into making decisions about your direction. I encourage you also to get some feedback from your colleagues, friends, or family so that you can get some independent perspectives on how clear and understandable they are. You can find some good examples of strong vision and mission statements and purpose statements on our revamped help and guidance web pages. And the links to that will be included in the deck when you get it. Next, we're going to focus on theory of change. But before we do that, let's have another quick poll. So we are asking, does your charity have a theory of change? So yes, you've seen one on your charity. No, we don't have one, or actually, I'm not too sure if we got one or not. Let's see what the results are that come in. So we're getting there. Most people have answered there. So, sorry, I've got an error message on my screen. Dan and Sophie, can I just check, are the results being shared for you at the moment?
Yes, it should
yes,
be being
okay.
shared now.
Okay, then. A lot of people are not sure if they have one or not. So I strongly recommend, and hopefully after we've done the presentation, you will want to go and ask your staff team whether you actually have a theory of change. Lots of organisations, about half in the room, don't have one, and a small number do. So hopefully today's presentation will help you think about how you can use it most constructively to think about your direction and strategy. So lots of people new to theory of change. So let's give you an overview of what it is. Charities are very good at talking about what is wrong in the world and how it should be a better place. They're often very good at talking about what they do to make a difference, what they deliver. But a theory of change focuses on the missing middle, or as it's expressed here on this cartoon, the miracle that occurs. So in theory of change, we look at, one side of the board, that big picture thinking, and on the other side of the board, what you deliver. But theory of change makes explicit how what you deliver makes a difference. It sets out clearly the journey of change you will realise in line with your public benefit. And when you are clear about that, you can set your goals more effectively and make your organisation more accountable. So there are quite a few potential ingredients to theory of change, but these are the absolute must-haves. So on the right-hand side is the impact, that broader long-term change that occurs as a result of your work. It's the change that we contribute to in a landscape of other actors, more the change we hope for rather than the change we work for on a day-to-day basis. And it's often similar to your vision statement, but sometimes it might be a little less big picture. Outcomes. These are the real world changes that come about as a result of what you deliver. They can be for people, organisations, communities, or wider society, and they occur over the short to medium to longer term. So examples could be about people developing more confidence, having increased access to finance, being more aware of how to combat climate change. And then your activities are what you do to make a difference in the world, rather than the internal operations of your charity. These are your services, your products, activities like advocacy and campaigning, what you deliver to make those real world changes happen. So a theory of change is a description of why a particular way of working will be effective, showing how change happens in the short, medium, and long term to achieve your intended impact and work towards your vision. And then the other key ingredient are your assumptions which underlie your theory of change. So what are you taking for granted in your work? Testing the thinking around what you need in place, the enablers for success, or the risks that your organisation needs to mitigate against in order to achieve your intended outcomes and impact. Theory change comes in different forms, but here are a couple we've made earlier, as the saying goes. So the Hardman Trust provides funding and support for people who've been in prison. And at the top in orange, you can see the impact statement. More people who have served prison sentences are able to make a positive contribution to society. The three boxes in grey at the bottom describe what they deliver. And then all the boxes in green are the outcomes. For example, the ways they want to change the lives of the people that they work with, improving their social connectedness, their capabilities, giving them increased self-confidence and greater financial independence. Let's have a look at another one. So the Seafarers Charity is incidentally another funder, but this funder provides funding for organisations which work to improve the lives of seafarers. And this is a very high-level theory of change, which attempts to explain their strategy. In the 5 yellow boxes at the top left, they have articulated the most important changes they want to create for seafarers through their grant giving. These are that seafarers have enhanced financial resilience, better working lives at sea, safer working lives, improved health and well-being, and increased social justice. All the charities' grant giving now aligns with the outcomes on this theory of change. But as part of their strategy, they wanted to go beyond being a funder in that traditional sense. And so their latest strategy is about being part of finding solutions too. So they gather information through their contact with charities and use it to inform their policy work so that they can advocate for change to key stakeholders like government. Then they have also decided that to be most successful in creating change for seafarers, they need to support maritime charities to be more sustainable and effective. So in both theories of change, you can see that the focus is on the difference the organisation makes rather than what it does, which is where it's so easy to get focused. And the theory of change gets to the heart of our purpose, explaining it clearly and succinctly. So why do we use this methodology so much with our clients, and how could it help you? Well, theory of change is not just about having a nice map, although the map makes a fantastic communication tool, internally and potentially externally if you want to share it. But it's about having the conversation, creating internal alignment around that shared understanding of your purpose. And when the world feels very dynamic, it's really, really important to achieve that alignment. Rather than asking what we should do, it asks us to articulate what benefit we will create, what difference we will make in the world, and bringing our organisational purpose from the high level to something which is more explicit and focused and relevant to the day-to-day. And that helps your direction of travel because it provides a lens for decision-making. The decisions are then about how can we make that difference in the world most effectively. Our evaluation can then also be more focused on understanding if we are achieving that difference and how we can or need to improve as an organisation. Even if you don't develop a full theory of change, challenging your thinking in this way will help you get much clearer about your direction. Start off by really being clear about the need, the barriers maybe that people are facing, and the underlying causes. And then it's harder, but if you can, start at the top, agreeing that long-term impact and the long-term outcomes. Then the journey of change through the medium and short-term outcomes. And then ask, what activities do we deliver or should we deliver to be most effective? And finally, really test your thinking by identifying the assumptions under your theory of change. So you've got clearer on your direction using some theory of change thinking. How can you move that to creating high-level goals? Well, there are different ways of expressing high-level goals, and there's no set way of doing it. Some charities like to talk about what they will do, and having a theory of change will help you get clearer about what that might look like. But in a changing world, this could be a little bit riskier. You may not be entirely sure where your money is going to come from. Maybe if that contract will be renewed in a few years' time. So another way to set high-level goals is to use an outcomes-based approach. These are unlikely to change over the course of your strategy, as they are so fundamentally rooted in your purpose. What is more likely to change is what you will deliver and how you will operate to realise that change, so your lower-level strategy. Not only do outcomes-based high-level goals potentially provide you with more flexibility to realise your strategy, but they can also create a more compelling story of what you are trying to achieve through it. And then your work on assumptions can also help you with setting goals. You will have identified what you need most for success, what the enablers of that are. So your goals could be about embedding EDI through your organisation and work, about the kinds of collaborations which could provide reach and expertise for you, about the need for diversifying your income to reduce your financial risk profile and increase unrestricted funds. Maybe it's about staff skills and so on, whatever comes out of your theory of change analysis. So we've considered theory of change, a methodology which creates a framework for setting direction and a lens for decision-making. But by itself, a theory of change is not enough, especially in a rapidly changing world. We need to really understand our environment to make informed decisions about how that theory will be realised. There are many tools and approaches for understanding our environment, but here is an overview of some particularly helpful ones. This is an other provider or player analysis. In the commercial sector, this would be called a competitor analysis. And of course, in reality, charities do compete, even though we often don't really want to think about it. I often find this kind of analysis is lacking in charities, but it is really important to ask and understand, what is our role? To ask if we should maybe stop doing something and focus our resources somewhere else. Maybe because we are duplicating what someone else is doing. Maybe because actually we have less expertise and we should leave it to someone else. Maybe we are seeing increased need, but if someone else has got that covered, then maybe we could signpost or partner up instead of trying to set up new services for people. We could even potentially, through doing this analysis, identify a gap, a need which no one else is meeting, and that therefore it could be important for us to fill. Just because everything is starting to look more complex doesn't mean that we should feel that we have to do everything. We should instead be focused on being most effective within the landscape of other providers. Other providers may be stakeholders in our work, but have we really taken the time to understand that wider stakeholder landscape? There are different stakeholder mapping matrices, but here is a really common one. Ask yourself, do you really understand your stakeholders? What are those relationships like, and how well are you managing them at the moment? Especially if the answer is no or not too well, then analysis can help you plan more strategically, thinking about who you should consult, the intelligence you need to make effective decisions, what perspectives and information your stakeholders could give you about how your environment is changing. And it's not just about what you need from them. Think about what perspectives and information of value can you share with them. Maybe you want to seek to influence them through that. Consider how you can embed stakeholder relationships in your ongoing environmental analysis. And your key stakeholders, of course, include your service users and your staff and maybe volunteers. And so here we return to considerations of participation and power within your organisation. How is information flowing in it? Is it only top down? Or are you getting communication from the people who use your services? Are you engaging with your staff and volunteers to understand what is changing and for who, and the impact it is having on both them and your organisation? A pestle analysis is a really helpful way as well of understanding our environment. So here we categorise our drivers. By that we mean the things which are going on around us which impact on us either positively or negatively. The world feels like an increasingly complex place with big challenges and changes buffeting us. While that can feel overwhelming, if we take some time to structure that information, we are in a better place to consider it and our response to it. The categories we use here are political, economic, social, technological, and environmental. And this week, with COP27 happening, we are increasingly reminded of our moral duty as charities to consider our environment and our response to climate change within our strategy. Sometimes these drivers overlap between different categories, but that's not important. It's about getting everything down. And it's not just about making a list. Once we've identified the ones which are most important to us, we have to step back and look at the priorities and the main themes. Ask what that will mean for us, for the people or the society that we serve, and how can we respond to those in the long term and through our ongoing strategic conversations. You can also then use that information to develop some possible scenarios about the future, different but plausible versions where you might find yourselves operating in say, 5 years' time, and then use those to test your thinking further. Finally, I'm going to introduce one more way of structuring our thinking about the future, one which embraces the perpetual change which is going on within and around us. The Three Horizons framework recognises that all things change over time. So trends peak, they rise, peak, and fade away. What feels very commonplace to us now was once very new or not so common. It was a pocket of the future whose time hadn't yet come. So you could think about things like the World Wide Web, which now feels very hard to live without. And a few years ago, electric cars felt like novelties, but in a few years, we won't even be able to buy a petrol car anymore, and they will become commonplace. And we know this is normally how the world works, especially though when we become very busy, it gets quite hard to think about the future in a structured way. So this is another framework which can help. It's one which is used by governments to look at societal trends to support long-term planning for populations. And it's also used by commercial businesses to plan for product innovation. So how do you get started with it? Well, you start by focusing on the now, articulating what is happening now and our assumptions around it. But then you look at the furthest horizon. So what pockets of the future do we think we can see now? What do we think in the really long term will become commonplace? Or maybe there are some certainties around that. This could be looking 10 or 20 years into the future, whatever stretch feels right for your organisation. Then we look at that middle horizon, where we see those rising trends are more evident now, asking what those mean for us and how can we adapt to them? What kind of resistance or barriers to them do we think that we will need to plan for? As I mentioned, we tend to get a bit stuck in the now and the choices right in front of us. And also right now, people are very anxious about the amount and pace of change going on. It's therefore been suggested that instead of starting with the now, it's really helpful to start with a fourth horizon of looking back into the past. For example, looking 2 times the length back of the time you intend to look forward. And that really helps you to create understanding of how the world reached to where we are now, but also an understanding, the opportunity to reflect on how the organisation has adapted to change in the past and giving it the confidence that it can continue to adapt within the future. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope it's given you some food for thought and some inspiration. What I want to do now is just give you a very quick run through of some of the resources, and then I'll hand over to Dan for the Q&A session. So a few months ago, we delivered 3 webinars on strategic planning under different themes. So you can follow the links to them. And as well as giving an introduction to the topics, you will also be able to hear some of our previous clients talking about their experience of using them in their strategy development processes. And then, as I mentioned, we've recently been revamping our online web resources to support you. And you will find there sections on strategy and impact, which we plan to develop over time. And for smaller charities, we have a dedicated email and a help desk phone number, which you can contact for help. In addition to this online support, we also deliver lots of training, so please do go to our website and check that out. And of course, if you would like any consultancy support, Dan and I would be happy to talk to you about that. We provide that around governance, strategic planning, evaluation and impact, and volunteering. And then I hear a lot that it's very hard to actually talk to stakeholders. So if you're struggling getting good information about your environment, here are some helpful sources of data to help you understand more about what's going on. And now back to Dan to talk more about the rest of Trustee Week.
Yeah, I just thought, well, we're going to move into questions. So I'll just allow people a couple of minutes to put your questions into the chat. And whilst we do that, you can see on your slide here some of the other activities that we are running for this week. As you've attended this session, and I should have said this at the start during the housekeeping, and I failed, we will of course share these slides and a link to the recording, but we're also planning on sharing links to the recordings and the content from the other webinars and sessions we're running across the week. And you will receive that in a single pack that you'll get towards the end of next week. So don't worry if you haven't got time to, have missed signing up for, or some of these sessions are full now, because we will be sharing that with you all. But this is just a run through of our kind of other activities across the week. And you will get slides and you will get the recordings. So we've got a couple of questions into the chat, and I can see a few more being added now. So Jenny, perhaps we'll stop sharing the slides maybe, and we can open up to those questions. So the first, there are 2 questions which are about theory of change. And the first one is is it essential to call it theory of change? And then the second one from Kim at Lupus UK is around are there any tools for creating theory of change maps? I suppose any templates, any guidance available there?
Right, so should you call it theory of change? I guess if you've got the ingredients, a bit like if you've got a cake, it's good to actually structure them all together and make the theory of change. It's what it's called in the sector. You will find funders sometimes asking for theory of change. So I think if you've got the ingredients, then maybe test it out and make one. I'm not going to tell you absolutely have to call it theory of change, but if that's what everyone else is calling it, it's probably quite a good thing to do that. In terms of tools and templates, every theory of change is bespoke to the organisation. It's something we get asked about a lot, but unfortunately that means there aren't any tools. But this process, which I described today is really quite a common one. You can hear about how other organisations have used it on that webinar. And also there's advice and guidance on our help pages. And you will find that we do a theory of change training course, which is one of our most popular courses. So we have quite a lot of ways that we can help you with theory of change. It's one of the things I do a lot as a consultant. So do check out what's available online for you.
Great, thank you, Jenny. There's a couple of questions kind of relating to smaller charities. So I'm going to kind of try to group those together as well. One around how do you decide if you're a smaller charity, should you aim for growth or not? And do you have any thoughts on kind of how to make those kind of difficult decisions around ensuring sustainability? And there's a second question on smaller charities, perhaps we answer them separately because I think they are slightly different, but around kind of you tend to be very reliant on a small core team, you know, and how do you mitigate the risk of kind of losing institutional knowledge or perhaps over-reliance on a small group of people? So 2 questions relating to small charities there, Jenny.
So, sorry, could you just remind me of the first one? I was just a bit focused on the second one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one was kind of focus on deciding whether or not to grow.
Yeah, growth. Yeah, so I should have put that down.
No, it's fine. I should.
No, so I think a few years ago, strategy was often synonymous with growth in the sector, and actually that's not what strategy is. Sometimes strategy is about downsizing your organisation and becoming more focused. So I think whether a growth strategy is right for you is really dependent on a lot of things. It's dependent on your organisational resources, the kind of funding you're able to attract. And that's kind of what I was saying, you know, what role do you play within your sector? And if you do want to grow, one of the ways that you might consider growing could be through mergers and acquisitions. And it's important to remember that while we get very attached to our charities and the history of them and the good work that we do, ultimately, as trustees, your role is to ensure that the purpose of your organisation continues most effectively. So if you are a small organisation and you find yourselves under a lot of threat, then you could also consider that as an option, although it's always best to consider mergers and acquisitions when your organisation is not under threat.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really great. I guess that links to the secondary part of that question around reliance on a group of people, because I suppose it's the same answer, isn't it? Is there anything? Is there a couple of folk are kind of following up saying that they're also kind of grappling with the challenge of reliance on a small group of decision makers. Is there anything else that you would advise in that kind of context?
Yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts on this, Dan, as well, because you support so many boards. I think it's quite tough. I think you have to document things in a way that they can be easily shared. Again, a few years ago, there was this trend in the charity sector to write these huge business plans. And I'm glad to see that people are moving away from that and creating higher level documents, more flexible processes. But it's good to, you know, to some degree, document the thinking that's gone into developing that strategy. And I think organizations have very different capacities, different setup. So I think you need to find a balance of how do you do that documentation in a way that is the right fit for you within your resources. And just thinking about having systems set up so people can find things.
I guess to add to that, I think, you know, perhaps moving slightly further away from strategy, although I think, you know, a strategy relies on the people. I think the answer is to integrate succession planning and think about succession as part of your strategy and your planning. You know, really it is part of your sort of analysis of the context you're operating in. How do we maintain and manage ensuring that we attract the same numbers of volunteers, that we either recruit the right staff or indeed the right board members? And so kind of that enabling stream of your strategy should have a kind of focus on that as well, I think.
Can I just add something else? I think it's in some organizations, the conversations happen between a small group of people. So really think, are your board and executive having good conversations, or is it happening between your chair and CEO? And making sure that those conversations are wider and constructive, and building that conversation into how you operate as a board executive relationship.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. We've got a couple of questions here, which I think is quite interesting. One in the chat from Heather, I think, and then one from Chris, the first question we had in, which is sort of the same topic, which is essentially how do you drive engagement, and build a culture within a board and staff group where people are kind of thinking and focused on strategy and the kind of change that you've talked about here, Jenny. So it's almost the bit that goes before the strategy is kind of how do you drive engagement? How do you make sure that your trustees are plugged into and leading their organisation? Hopefully I've done a good job of summarising and putting those two together.
Well, I think ensure your trustees have greater understanding of their role. There are great resources out there to do that. And again, NCVO does good training and online resources around those things. So everyone on your board should understand what they're there for and the commitment that they need to make to your organisation. And I think that kind of commitment should be enshrined in your policy documents, the expectation you have around trustees of, showing up to meetings and participating. I think it's really important now to set aside time to have those conversations face to face if you can. Most people I meet now are desperate to get back in the room with each other. And I think that creates a really helpful, constructive space to ask people what is going well about the kind of conversations we are having, and maybe where do we need to improve. And of course, you don't have to just have a whole away day to do that. You can also do those kinds of check-ins at the end of your board meetings. There is very good guidance, again, through the Charity Governance Code about what good conversations and good governance looks like. So you can try using that as a starting point. But I think you need to find a space to have quite honest conversations about how you can improve, about the kind of commitments you want to make as an organisation to setting aside time to strategy. I think about how you improve your agendas and the way you run your meetings. Are you going through the same agenda, or are you really doing that process of asking what are the really key conversations we need to have at this meeting? So the more business as usual stuff gets left to the end, and that you're actually dedicating time for those meatier conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So carving out that space for strategy, horizon scanning, using the board to make sure that they are leading in that way. We've got a couple of questions here around that are focused on the kind of practical implementation of a strategy. So once you've kind of got to a point where you feel that you're happy, not that this thing is what I'm taking from your presentation, Jenny, not that this thing is ever static, but once you get to that point where you're kind of happy with the strategy and a document, how do you make sure that that is kind of followed by by the CEO and by the wider team? And how should a board seek to kind of monitor progress against the strategy? Is a theme amongst a couple of the questions.
So today, we haven't had a huge amount of time, so we've thought very much at setting that high level direction. But then when you do that, you need to take those different elements that you set, those different aims, and start moving down to the next level. So start setting objectives for those. If you try and do it for like the whole 3 or 5 years, it ends up going out of date and you end up creating too much work for yourselves. But you should certainly be looking at the next year or 18 months ahead, and then setting some key targets around those. What sometimes happens, though, is I find organisations have a high-level strategy, but the actual sort of planning of how they will implement, sometimes those documents are a bit disconnected. So I strongly recommend that when you create those planning documents, you have your high-level aims, and next to that, you have the explanation of what you are going to do, how you will achieve those, and then sort of work down through the hierarchy. So your staff team don't just you know, see your strategy as this nice 3-year document that you publish, but actually somehow it doesn't quite connect to your day-to-day. And there are lots of you know, we have a business planning template. It's in quite a lot of detail, but there are different templates you can use on Excel and things like that. And again, there's no one size fits all, but I think it is that process of getting clear on your purpose, your high level aims, then asking what are the things that we are going to do under that help us achieve those aims, and then moving down to your targets and finding a really structured way to communicate that with your teams. And then I guess actually there's another bit about how do we feed back to the board. And I think one of the other things I see happening in charities, and I don't know your experience of this, Dan, is boards often get a lot of project reports, long project reports, but actually it's really important not to overwhelm your board with information, which is a lot of it quite operational, but to stick to those big strategic items, that high level stuff. And then the board can always ask for more information. So think about how you report to the board, and are you really sort of doing maybe a traffic light system where you're saying this is going okay, don't really need to talk about this, but some of the orange ones we need to have a quick chat about, and these are the red items, the ones we really need to focus on. And again, that should all be connected back to those strategic documents in some way, which ultimately connect to your high level aims. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dan.
I think the only thing to add would be, for me, if you follow a process of engagement that you sort of set out there, Jenny, in your presentation around who are your stakeholders, and obviously your staff team and your CEO would be key to that where you have them. You know, I think you should never get to a point where a strategy feels like it's happening to your volunteers or happening to your staff or happening to your CEO. It should be that partnership approach. And by following and using some of the tools that you set out there, I think that can be achieved. I wish we had time for some more questions, but unfortunately it is almost 1 o'clock. So we're going to draw this to a close. We will attempt to check out any questions that we haven't answered and have a go at answering those. I should say that if you want to save the chat, that won't be shared, but you can, as those following along in the chat might have seen, you can save the chat if you wish by clicking on the 3 dots. We have shared the presentation in the chat, but as I say, that will also be combined as part of the follow-up pack that you will receive with slides from all of the presentations from across the week. All that then remains is for me to say thank you so much. I'm sorry if we didn't quite get to your question, but we will do our best to follow up. Thank you for giving up your time to join our presentation today. And thank you to Jenny for guiding us through kind of strategy in changing times. Hope you
it's been
enjoy
a real pleasure. Thanks so much. I hope it's been helpful, and we look forward to replying to your questions in more detail.
Thanks so much. We'll allow people to dial off now. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Emily, if you press the 3 dots, I think we can give some instructions. Perhaps Sophie can give some instructions on the saving of the chat.